Thank you, Daniel. So today, John and I would like to talk to you about optimizing the preoperative assessment. And basically, we're going to talk about how we can use new technology in terms of workflow automation and decision automation to bring to the surface a lot of value that may be left behind in the current way we're doing things. So let me start by setting the stage a little bit by agreeing on some terminology and some context. So what we're talking about is the notion of workflow automation. Workflow automation is basically technology-enabled orchestration of activities that are able to react to events. So we're orchestrating a series of activities, reacting to event, with the human in the loop or not in the loop. So we can have straight-through processing or human-in-the-loop type of workflow automation. The same goes with decision automation, where decision automation is more of a notion of a stateless notion where we're provided with some inputs and we give an answer based on that given input. So by combining workflow, process, case, and decision together, we have this capability of orchestrating the activities that are needed. To do so, we're based on a series of standards called BPM Plus Health, and BPM Plus Health is provided by the OMG Standard Development Organization. OMG is made famous for being the curator of UML in the development world, but they also have over 180 different standards that they make available to the general public in an open way. The standards that we're interested in here today are listed there. DMN, which is the decision model and notation, BPMN, which is the business process model and notation, and CMMN, which is the case management model and notation. And all three of these standards share a couple of characteristics. One is that they are completely visual, so you draw what you want to happen. So it's a drawing notation. The second is that these drawings, when properly configured, they become executable. So you can actually execute the drawing or the model you created. So we're not only interested in looking at how BPMN, CMMN, and DMN can bring value, but we want to marry these to the healthcare standards, the usual suspect that everybody is talking about, FHIR, SMART, and CDS Hook, and combining all this to provide higher value. So how does that look like? A little bit of an orientation here. At the low end, we have the aggregated data that we're aggregating from different sources. Once we have these aggregated data sources, we want to put some common schema and structure on them using FHIR, which gives us some computable data. So once we have FHIR encoded data, we have computable data that we can do data automation on. Now, by applying other standards like CDS Hook and SMART, we can do this data automation or this data manipulation within a clinical context, which gives us information automation because data in context is information. So using these standards, we add our information automation. And then by adding to this mix the BPM Plus suite of standards, we then add the notion of task, activities, role and responsibility, decisioning, case management, event orchestration, and we can even tag in some AI and machine learning and CQL, where now we're doing an orchestration of knowledge. So we have this workflow and decision automation, which lead us to what we consider more intelligent healthcare automation. So hopefully this gives you an overview of the global context of what we're talking about. So what are the benefits of using these BPM Plus health standard in combination with HL7 standards or healthcare standard? Is that because of the visual nature of these standards, we get a visual story of the patient progress. So we can visually see where we are in the actual progress of the patient. We get standardized clinical pathways. So now each single patient, each single instance of that pathway is going to be based on the same structure and visual. And we're going to provide data in context. So by being able to follow and be at the right place, we can bring the data at the right time, at the right place, and we can improve organizational and operational efficiency. So these are all benefits that are added on top of the already high value benefits that we get from FHIR and CDS Hook and Smart on FHIR. And I'll pass it to John now to introduce our topic of today.
Thanks, Denny. For those of you who are members of payer organizations, historically, you've been faced by a number of challenges. You have to worry about the quality of care in your HEDIS score, worry about cash flow, either in the form of money coming in or being dispersed to clinicians and hospitals. You have to worry about patient satisfaction. And finally, you have to be compliant with rules and regulations from the government that is ever changing. Next slide, please. But I think as we have progressed into the current changes in healthcare reimbursement with value-based care and population health, some of the historical things that have worked in the past are starting to change. Payers are now buying up providers, providers are becoming payers, and no one really is certain where things are going to go. And in the end, our belief is that these changes will mean that payers and providers will have to collaborate more. Historically, pre-authorization is one of the points where clinicians and providers and payers have interacted. But as time goes on, this will need to be expanded so that both the providers and payers can collaborate to optimize the care of the patient and also the financial realities that are coming down. For the example that we're going to be using, we're going to be looking at the surgical journey, primarily the preoperative phase of that surgical journey, to see how we could use BPMN Plus models to achieve this level of collaboration. Next slide, please. So this is a BPMN model that shows a model for automated pre-authorization for a total knee arthroplasty, or TKA. Many of you may not have seen these models before, but this is a relatively simple one. You enter at the left with a triggering event, in which case the patient may be referred for evaluation. You then go to a square, and the square has a little mark in the left upper corner, and this indicates that it's a decision. Going into the decision are little squares with open arrows, which is data. And to the above the square, there are little rectangles with a black item, which indicates the outputs. So data goes in, the decision engine uses rules or equations, decision tables, or whatever have you to reach a conclusion. That conclusion then goes to a gateway where X marks the spot. And at the gateway, it's a conditional branch where either something is true and you go one way, or it's false and you go the other way. In this case, the first question asked is, are there contraindications? If a person has contraindication, you don't want to take them to surgery, and so you might have to consider an alternative a pathway of care. If they don't have contraindications, then you want to decide, do they have indications? And for total knee arthroplasty, the usual indication is the disease severe enough? So there's various metrics of clinical performance, x-rays, historical data that all feed into a decision to say, is this severe disease? If it's not severe disease, well, maybe the person will be amenable to less invasive methods than surgery. So you want to take that branch and go to an alternative therapy and wait for surgery until the disease is more severe. If, on the other hand, the disease is severe, then you go to a decision, which basically says, have you had a trial of conservative therapies? And conservative therapies might be physical rehabilitation, it might be medication, it might be exercise, it might be whatever you choose to do. If they haven't had a trial of several weeks or months of this conservative therapy, well, maybe you want to try that before you get invasive. If, on the other hand, they've had this and they've not progressed, they still have severe disease, that's the person you want to take to surgery. So we've given a description of about a minute on what this model looks like, and I think many of you looking at it can quickly learn how to interpret this model. For pre-authorization, each type of surgery has slight modifications, but this pattern holds for pretty much all pre-authorizations that go through. Again, as Denny has pointed out, this is more than a picture. Later on, when Denny gives the demo, he'll show how this can be executed and then become an API that can be ingested by a variety of methods. Next slide, please. And so this represents the process that's involved in the preoperative phase of the surgical journey. Basically, the process consists of a series of tasks, each of which is fairly well defined. Some are sequential, others work in parallel, but basically there's a chain of activity. The first is you want to determine is the person fit for surgery, you want to obtain pre-authorization, you want to obtain consent, you want to rehabilitate the patient, and prehabilitation is basically something like rehabilitation, but it happens before surgery, where you get the person into an optimal state to undergo the surgery. This has been demonstrated by the surgical specialists as being extremely valuable in improving outcomes and reducing complications. And then finally, after the person is fully prehabilitated, you schedule and get them ready for surgery. And just before you take them to surgery, you do the final top off to handle problems before they go to the OR. So cooperation along this entire journey ensures that there is the best possible delivery of care. Next slide, please. So this is a concept map, and this is from another tool, which is a knowledge entity modeler, which allows people to capture all the information required about a given domain of knowledge. One tool is this, which is a concept map where all the concepts are laid out and then the relationships are established. There's also a terminology tool, which allows you to define each term, give their various types of SNOMED, LOINC, or alternative coding, and then the basis of rules. If we look at that, we start off at the top with the surgical journey. The surgical journey has a preoperative phase, a perioperative phase, and a postoperative phase. Preoperative phase has fitness for surgery, preauthorization, rehabilitation, and perioperative risk identification and mitigation. Postoperative has the handling of surgical complications, the management of the early postoperative phase, and then the long-term rehabilitation back to optimum function. So this basically shows these are the elements that are involved in the concept of the surgical journey. The value of this is twofold. One, it's one way of engaging your subject matter experts, because this is a relatively simple tool to understand. So they can be engaged, laying out the knowledge as they understand it, so it's ready for the programmers to start building the models. The second is it establishes the base for which everything should be built. And that has the value later on, where a year from now or 2 years from now, where I or someone who has replaced me is engaged in maintaining the model, they can ingest this information and suddenly they understand where things came from, why they're there. And so hopefully this gives you a more robust model that has fewer misunderstandings that can creep into any software that's maintained for any period of time. Next slide, please. So if we take the knowledge that we've developed in the concept map and we develop a BPMN model, this is an example that you might come up with. Again, we start off at the far left, where the triggering event is the person is considered for surgery. We then go to 2 green squares, which I would call the green lights for surgery. One is the person fit for surgery? The second is the person authorized to have surgery, that they meet all the requirements to have the surgical procedure done. The fitness for surgery is a decision model where, again, data goes in and then a decision comes out. The criteria for fitness for surgery can be quite diverse. You can ask historical questions, as here, where you ask about comorbidities and nutritional status and exercise status to determine if the person is fit. Or it can be a functional test, such as a 6-minute walking distance or stair climbing exercise, all of which decide, is this person fit for surgery, or is surgery more likely to be the person will not survive surgery. If a person is unfit, then you have to consider alternative therapy to surgery. If they're not unfit, i.e. fit, then you go to pre-authorization. Again, pre-authorization has several steps. If the person is pre-authorized, then you proceed to surgery. If not, you look for alternative paths of care. In the pre-op, the little hash box outlines 3 elements of prehabilitation. The red box indicates risk assessment and referral. This may be risk analytics, where a person may not be known to have may not obviously have certain problems, but you run analytics against a variety of measures to see, hey, is this person likely to have a problem during or after surgery? The white square indicate operational issues that need to be conducted to optimize surgery and recovery. And finally, we have the blue square where we consider optimizing the comorbidities. These are known problems that the patient has. But are they, and what are you going to do to get the person to the best possible shape prior to surgery? Once all those tasks are completed, then you come back together, you schedule surgery, you wait for surgery, and then finally you go to the final task, which is a series of steps to optimize the surgery, where you might give medications to prevent thrombosis or infection. You control the medications, you determine if blood is required or not. So if you take this entire sequence of tasks, this outlines the preoperative phase of the surgical journey. Next slide, please. When we look at prehabilitation, this is the task grouping. It's a CMMN model, which outlines all the different things that can be looked at as risks that the patient may encounter. We have one group that might deal with end organ damage. We have another thing that might deal with psychological or behavioral issues. And then finally, we have issues that are related primarily to surgery. These are limited in this phase, but they can be as many as you want. One caveat for this is the more you look for, the more you'll find. And so that can be a problem if you're finding too many issues. If you don't look for enough, then you may be surprised. So there's a careful balance is required to decide how much information and what information do I look for in what situations to make sure that the risk patient is identified. Various risks that might be end organ is the person going under this type of surgery likely to get heart damage, have myocardial infarction, or are they likely to develop postoperative atrial fibrillation? Another one might be, are they going to have lung complications like a deterioration of COPD? Are they going to have a stroke, optic neuropathy, or renal complications? They can also be liver, GI, musculoskeletal, skin, what have you. All the organs can be screened for a risk of a problem.
And John, I would say something that's important to say here is that this CMMN case management model this is a series of alternative that the clinician or the provider can decide to take those steps or not. So these are more kind of discretionary or optional steps that are guided more by human knowledge than by machine at this point.
And also, because it's visual, it's something that can be assigned to different people, where not only because the physician or the clinician providing primary care doesn't have to be responsible for executing all of these. So it can be assigned to an alternative person, such as an anesthesiologist or to a rehabilitation person, and therefore all the tasks can be assigned so that they get completed by the time of surgery. But the various risks that you run into are things where if this person goes to surgery, what risks will they encounter? If they're encountering risk, is it low risk? And so they're not really that significant. Are they ones where I need to get a consult to go to a cardiologist or a pulmonologist to evaluate the patient? Or is the person high risk and I need to put them in a higher category of support for surgery, which helps in scheduling? In this screen, we've got the operational issues, and operational issues include things like having the advanced care directives prepared. Everyone should have an advanced care directive. And so this is a good time to prepare them. You need to have personalized patient education. And the education, it can actually be fed by our risk analysis, where if a person has been identified by the previous models as being at risk for various complications, they can be informed about what their personal risk is and what they can do to reduce the risk. This personal education can then be used to derive informed consent. If the person does not give consent, surgery again can be canceled. But when they go to surgery, they will be given the best information possible about what risks they entail. And this can significantly reduce liability for the provider and for the healthcare institution. There can be financial counseling and then arrangements made for durable and social caregiving for the post-operative recovery, which can reduce problems that can occur if this type of preparation has not been done in advance. Next slide, please. And so we come to the known problems that the person has. And many of you are familiar with these. Is the person physically active? Are they overweight or underweight? Do they smoke or drink too much? Are they anxious? All these are things that can be identified, and then prescriptive interventions can be given, such as I want you to exercise for 30 to 60 minutes every day. I want you to lose 25 pounds. I want you to stop drinking and smoking for 8 weeks. I want you to take counseling to deal with your anxiety. Then there's an assessment of known comorbidities, which might be anemia, control of active infection, nutritional screening, control of active comorbid conditions to make sure that they're under control at the time of surgery, possibility frailty in the patient. Surgery can trigger, make some clinical frailty overt, so you want to know about that in advance. And then finally, a summary of all the comorbidities so that you can decide, is again this person low risk, moderate risk, or high risk for the surgery that's coming forward. All this is very useful to know. And because there's so many assessments that need to be done, it's easy to overlook one or two, and those misses can be troublesome later on. Next slide, please. And so finally, we have the last CMN model where we're talking about the topping off of the patient just before they go to the operating suite. These can be models for determining what level of a deep vein thrombosis prophylaxis you want. Some people undergoing minor surgery or with no history of a coagulation disorder can get by with a minimal DVT prophylaxis. On the other hand, a person with a past history of thrombosis or undergoing high-risk surgery may need more aggressive. That can all be determined at this point. Similarly, for antibiotic prophylaxis, this can significantly reduce post-operative infections. That can be determined here. Is blood needed? The amount of blood given in orthopedic surgery has reduced drastically in the last 10 years, but sometimes people do need blood, and so you can decide what level of blood planning do you need to have. And then finally, the medications that the person is taking can be managed so that the patient doesn't have problems as a result of that in surgery. So that takes us through all the models that are required, and that's back to you, Denny, for the demo.
Okay, thank you, John. So basically, we did a pretty broad introduction to these notion of BPM plus model. You can see they're very highly visual models. And then we want to do a quick demo before we come back for conclusion of how this actually works in the real life or in an automation environment. So let me start here with the pre-authorization model. So here's the same model within our tool here, the Trisotech tool, and you can see this pre-authorization model that is linked to the different decision. Now, this model is both human consumable and machine consumable. So for example, if I go here and I generate the report from it, you will see that I can get a fully documented guideline of this particular model here. So it gives me the full documentation. So the model is not only the visual logic displayed, it's also the documentation of your actual guideline. And this is where mostly payers will be focused on this pre-authorization model. And basically what we can do is now, this model is also the code, so I can publish this model. And when I go to publish this model, it will generate a service for this model. So basically an executable service. So the tool generated on the fly a form, an HTML form that I can actually use to execute the model. It also generated on the fly a fully documented REST API for that service. So now I have a fully documented REST API that I can execute and call. It also generated on the fly a open API file defining it. And for healthcare, it also generates some different healthcare endpoints. So to show this in action, let me go here where we have a demo rig, which is basically a mock-up of an EHR EMR. You can see my patient navigator here. This is actually running on our Trisotech SmileCDR server. So we're running all our FHIR data to the patient on the SmileCDR server. Now I can go back here and take the CDS hook endpoint. So the tool generated a CDS hook endpoint for that service. I can copy that and add it into my EHR EMR as a CDS hook endpoint. And when I do that, then the service is run against the patient. So right now I have Rose Reynolds as a selected patient. So the hook is on the patient change here. And you can see that the logic we discussed is all done, no contraindication, permitted. So this particular patient went all the way through here and approved for TKA. Where if I switch to another patient, here the service runs, and this particular patient is rejected for current disease status. And if I move to yet another patient, I get different criteria based on, for example, for Michelle, she's sent to conservative therapy. So this whole model here has been executing, taking all the data from the patient as we hook into it, and then do the logic and provide us the hook card that was expected. So it gives you a quick sense of how you can go from the model as its visual logic, which makes it very amicable to subject matter expert, whether they're payer or provider, to agree or disagree and request changes to this model. And the model is also the documentation and the code. Now, going into the full preoperative situation, you can see we have quite an extensive list of model that covers the topic that John's introduced to us. So if I go to the knowledge model of the surgical journey, I can go and look at the concept map, and here I have my surgical journey concept map. And the beauty of all this, as John mentioned, is that I have also my terminology that is disambiguated. So I have my terms that are very precise, and I have, with the definition of the terms, I also have my coding that I attach. And then from the concept map, I have those fact types that are basically a verbalization of the diagram of the concept map that further disambiguate the terminology. And we can also add what we call business rules, or rules that are applying to the context. So now we have a very deep knowledge base of the term, what they mean, how they interrelate, and the different rules that govern this. And we can apply this to our different model. So here is the model that John took us through. And if I go in here into the actual case model, I can actually walk through that model and the logic of it. So I'll just wait for it to open for me here. And so because the model is more than just a drawing, I can actually walk through the model. And you can see here the comment that I made when John was explaining these models before, is these are more kind of handpicked by the subject matter expert, or what we call the knowledge modeler, who will decide which one of these he wants to enact and select which one he wants to take place, and then can actually step through that specific model, which is in this case will be an actual workflow. Well, we're going to go through the different steps needed here. It's a very simple decision that is taken. But you can see that you can go through the different part of the model and select what's applicable in your context. So we can mix and match between automated, fully automated, straight-through processing to models where the human is interacting, selecting what needs to be done, and can even influence what's provided as input or what the conclusion is. It could be that the machine automated decision comes back and refuse, and the person can override it and approve it based on his local observation. So this gives you a very quick view of this notion of BPM Plus model on CDS hook connected to FHIR data provided by the SmileCDR server in the background. So we have a fully integrated, what we would consider a more intelligent healthcare automation context in here. So as I presented and discussed, with taking this approach, the benefit that you get is that the model is the actual guideline specification. So you have a single artifact that is a visual artifact that you have to manage the life cycle of. So the model is the guide documentation, the model is the guideline automation code. So rather than having multiple artifacts that you have to manage the life cycle, whenever the base document narrative change, we have to change the logic, and then from that we have to change the code, and we have to change. Here you have a single artifact that provides you with all these different aspects of your model. So that's a very efficient and effective way of doing this. Plus, any change that you want to do to your model, you can readily publish, like I've done with the one-click publish, and now you have a new service that automates or execute, enact, and support the new guideline. So all these models are great, but they need data, they need the information, we need the context, and that's where the HL7 standard, and more particularly SmileCDR with its data fabric, provides us all the data we need in an automated way when needed, or present it to our care provider to approve or discard depending on the context. And I'll pass it back to John for some of our conclusion today.
Okay, thank you, Denny. Okay, so I think what we try to achieve in this is to show that how patient-centric value-based care requires a participation of payers and providers along the complete surgical journey. These allow people to work collaboratively and hopefully unlock some of the value that might otherwise be missed or not anticipated prior to an event later on. Payers can benefit by optimizing the cost and care. They can look at the entire journey, and hopefully they can collaborate with clinicians more in ways more than just HEDIS scores or pre-authorization. The best way to get a good HEDIS score is to be sure the best possible care is given, and this is one way of achieving that. For providers, it offers the same sorts of benefits, only slightly different, in that processes are transparent and understandable by all members of the healthcare team. It's possible to coordinate different tasks between different members of the team so that nothing gets left out, and therefore you can achieve greater efficiency in healthcare. And I believe that's it, Stenny.
I would add, John, one point that you just raised that's very interesting too, that we didn't really mention here, is the benefit of the measurement as well. So not only does this provide us a full context, so we look at the big picture. So it's really about the patient and the patient journey. So the patient is at the center and the journey around the patient. But also, it allows us to have data all the way through. So rather than our measurement being basically retroactive and looking back as to what is happening, we have data that is provided all along the journey. So now we can do measurement in a live data context as opposed to doing retrofit type of measurements looking back. So we believe this is a very innovative way of adding knowledge and management of content on top of the healthcare existing standards. And we are open to some questions. So Daniel, we'll give it back to you.
Yeah, thank you again, Denis and John. So as I mentioned, it is now time for the live Q&A. So please feel free to use the chat to submit your questions. And I think I'll just get started with a question. John, you mentioned earlier in your presentation that there was increased collaboration between payers and providers, and Denis, you touched upon this very as well. You speaking about patient-centric, value-based care. What were some of the trends that precipitated this change? Was it legislative motivations, or I guess clinicians and patients, payers, providers got together and tried to kind of forge a new path towards value-based care?
Well, it's for providers, it's something that they've been kicking and streaming for. Primarily, it's regulatory requirements. The government has determined that previous models of care were not as good a value as they might be. And since they were the payer, they said, this is what the type of care we want. And it's the type of decision that has positive and negative connotations to it. In the positive, why should the government pay for care that might be suboptimal if they only want to pay for good care? And that's perfectly legitimate. On the other hand, many people are seriously ill, and if they go to surgery, they're likely to have complications. Are you going to deny that person surgery because if I'm a surgeon and I know this person's going to have complications, and if they have complications, I'm not going to get paid for surgery, I don't have a whole lot of incentives to take the person to surgery. So that's a dark side. And since this has been evolving over the last decade, it's an evolving issue. People don't know where it's exactly going, and people are trying, how do I control the cost? How do I provide the best value? How do I give the best care? How do I take all the interacting pieces and make them better? It's evolving right now, and we don't know where it's going to go, basically.
Yeah, I like to use the driving analogy in this context. If you think of where we are generally now, we're driving with a black cardboard in front of the windshield, and all we have is our mirror to look back, and this is the measures, and we look through the mirror back to how well did we do, and we're trying to steer in the context of currently without any view of what's going on. So what we're suggesting here is to remove that sheet that's covering your windshield, so you see the context, you see where you're going, and yes, you have your rear view mirror to see how you perform, but you can see how you're performing right now, right in the context. So it gives you the steering wheels in your hand, basically.
Okay. Actually, I have a follow-up question to that, and I guess kind of continuing on with the driving analogy. I guess who will be some of the players that are in this kind of car? Because obviously, or vehicle. Because when we talk about the pre-authorized models, and obviously it's very thoughtful and a very thorough model. Is it clinicians providing input and feedback, patients as well? Obviously, the health informaticists who are working in these systems, and individuals such as yourselves. I was just kind of wondering who the key players were from the ground up.
That's basically everyone engaged in healthcare is a potential player in this, in the use of the models, because you have people who are knowledgeable about the subject matter. They're good for designing them, but they may not be terribly good at coding them. Then you have the people who are the knowledge representation experts, the data analysts. We have people like SmileCDR which is primarily giving access to the data with which, if you don't have the data, the models won't run. So you have that. You have the patients who have to be engaged in providing the data and actually participating in prehabilitation and making lifestyle changes that will give them better health. It will be the payers, because they're responsible for paying for all this, government regulations. Basically, everyone has to be involved all the way along the spectrum of society.
Yeah, and fundamentally, the root of all this is going to be evidence-based. So is whatever is been published and reviewed by peer and acknowledged as best practice. Now, some organization may choose to adopt the best practice, the published evidence. Others may want to create their own. So for example, you have organizations such as Mayo and Intermountain and other type of organizations that are producing their own knowledge, their own expertise to be applied within their own organization. And the same can be said of payers. But as John mentioned early, we're progressing more and more into a payer-provider world where organizations are both the payer and the provider. And therefore, there's a lot of benefit of having both sides of the house agree on these models and how to go forward.
Okay, I just had one last question. It strikes me, especially if we're living in like a post-COVID or still we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and in the beginning of the pandemic, it exposed a lot of cracks and faults in healthcare systems around the world. Did you see COVID and like the continuing pandemic and how it kind of affected how people thought about pre-authorized workflows, and pre-authorization in general?
The main drive that was seen during COVID wasn't so much dealing with pre-authorization, because indeed many hospitals canceled elective surgery for many months. It's only now that many of the hospitals are returning elective surgery. And so if you don't have elective surgery, the need for pre-authorization kind of diminishes. What was triggered was really the interest in telehealth. And as people's care, one of the big drivers from the government is to have more care given in the home as opposed to big box hospitals. Many of the influences from COVID was really something that helped the exit from the outpatient care, the home care, the need for telehealth, all became primary drivers, all of which again can be helped by models.
And in that telemedicine context, the orchestration that we're showing here, the flow of activities may also include a medical device that are providing you with all the different inputs as we're going to remotely. So it gives you a larger scope of everything.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so that is the end of our session. And I'd just like to thank you again, Denis and John, for a wonderful session. We look forward to hearing what Trisotech has in the future. I know I'll definitely be keeping tabs on it personally. And just another thank you to our attendees for all your questions and participation throughout the session. And so just a reminder, before you leave this session, please provide your feedback by clicking on the polling tab on the right side of your screen or on the bottom of your screen if you're using mobile app. And once you finish providing your feedback, you'll see a code and you can paste that into the Event Game Hub. So do it quickly as the IHG session is about to end. And we look forward to seeing you at the closing keynote presented by our CTO, James Agnew, at 2:30 p.m. Just like to thank Denis and John once again, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you all for your attention. Appreciate it.